first panel of the night, and this is going to be around K-12, right? It's about the kids here. It's about the kids. And so as I bring some of the panelists to the stage, we do have another series of questions for you all. And so just to kind of, get you all's thoughts on things, I do want to get a sense of how many people from last year that are watching right now attended last year's summit, right? So go to, again, Minty.com, put in the code there, 3778-0720. How many of you all attended the panel or the summit last year? Also, what are you all interested in achieving today? So as you answer your questions, you can just kind of move on to the next one, right? What are you all interested in achieving today? And the biggest thing is kind of setting the stage for this conversation. What do you believe is the biggest barrier to Atlanta's Black K-12 students entering the tech workforce, right? What do you all believe is the biggest barrier? So go to Minty.com, put in the code 3778-0720. And then we're gonna I'll come back later and share some of the results. So without further ado, I'm gonna kick it over to this amazing group of folks in the education space. They care deeply about it. So Andrea, I'm gonna kick it to you. Go from there. Unfortunately, we weren't able to use the slides. Maybe we'll just talk through it, but we'll kind of go from there. So I'm gonna go off screen now, and Andrea, I'll take it. You can take it from here.
Thank you so much, Joey. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight. My name is Andrea Miller, and I'm going to be moderating the K-12 Computer Science Ecosystem panel tonight. We have a lot to discuss, but before we begin, let's meet and learn a little bit about our panelists before we jump into some information and discussion. So ladies, briefly introduce yourself, your role in your organization if you choose to share, and just how are you connected to the K-12 computer science space? Anona, we're going to start with you, then we'll go to Erica, Lavita, and end with you, Shana.
Thank you so much for having me tonight. My name is Anona Shugart-Walker. I currently work in the social impact space, and prior to that was a classroom teacher, district administrator, and also did college success work. So very passionate about creating pathways for students to be able to be socially mobile. Thank you again for having me.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Erica Moore, and I serve as the executive director of an organization called the STEM Funders Network, which is a national organization and a collaborative of grant makers pretty much from around the country. And I say pretty much because unfortunately we don't have any members from the Southeast that are a part of the network, and that's a problem because that means that voice isn't a part of that conversation. My background, graduated from tech, worked for IBM, worked for BMC Software, worked for Southwire, and then transitioned into nonprofit leadership like executive director for Tag Ed, and then philanthropic leadership. So K-12 computer science is very important to me just based on everything from my degree to the roles that I've served in and the capacity in which I serve right now. So I'm honored to be here tonight with this amazing panel of all women that are a part of this discussion for the evening. Thank you for the invitation.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lavita Williams. I work in the education K-12 space. Previously, I was also a former computer science teacher for many years and did a lot of curriculum writing for various ed tech companies. And so I am excited to be here tonight to share a lot about computer science education and where we currently stand. I'm truly passionate about computer science education as I've been in education for about 20 years. And so I've definitely seen the pathways and the growth that it can create for Black students. So thank you all for having me here today.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Shana Vidal-White. I am the director of CS Equity Initiatives at the KPOR Foundation. KPOR Foundation is located in Oakland, California, but we do have initiatives in 3 of our target cities, which is Oakland, Atlanta, and Detroit. I do a lot of the work nationally for us, and then also lead our CS for Atlanta initiative, which we began last year, which is a partnership with our 8 Metro Atlanta districts to help bring more equitable CS outcomes to students in those districts. We have some initial data that's showing that, of course, as we all probably realize, CS is not equitable because our educational system is not equitable. But we are trying to, through this CS for Atlanta initiative, as well as some of the people on this panel, as well as other national leaders, bring more equitable computer science outcomes so that kids not only have access to computer science, but it's quality access, and then they can engage in those opportunities to see if tech is a career they want to pursue.
Okay, thank you so much for those introductions. So as you all can see, we have a wealth of knowledge and expertise speaking to you this evening. So Shayna, I want to actually kick it back to you. Given the lens of your current work that you explained, can you provide us with some context and some data, including any advancements regarding the state of technology education for Black K-12 students in Metro Atlanta, and particularly their readiness to be competitive in the tech workforce?
Sure. So there's always a report that comes out every year that kind of does the state of computer science education. It's done by ESEP, which is Equitable Computer Science Organization, and code.org. And this past year, they noted that 57% of high school students have access to computer science courses nationwide. I would say Georgia is above that average. But still, that is a data point that does not have full context. Having access and who's actually in the classes are totally different story. We've done some data deep dives for our Metro Atlanta districts. For representation of Black students, we've also looked at some of the other demographics like girls, and then also students with disabilities, because we know in a lot of our public schools, Black students are often students with disabilities as well, and that will also deny them access to computer science courses. Of the 8 metro districts that we work with right now, and those districts are Atlanta Public Schools, Clayton County, Cobb County, Decatur City, DeKalb County, Fulton, Gwinnett, and Marietta City. Only 3 of those counties, and that is Atlanta, Clayton, and Decatur, have Black student representation in their courses that mimics or is very, very similar to the demographics in the actual schools. So that means, for example, if 1 is the number that's saying that there are X amount of Black students and that same percentage of Black students are taking CS, that is what we're trying to shoot for that number to be 1 or higher. And APS is 1.15, Clayton is 1.05, Decatur City is 1.05, and Fulton County is 1.04. All the other districts are below that 1 number, which is part of the reason that we're doing this work in Atlanta. But then we look at other intersections of student data, like girls. There are no districts in our 8 district group that have an equal representation of girls that is representative of the number of girls in the school. Same with students with disabilities. Those numbers are very low. They're not close to 1. And so that's the numbers that we're trying to close the gaps on to bring up. Again, I always like to mention is that we're talking about quality CS, not just putting kids in front of a computer, but having them engage with computer science critically, understanding that we want them to become critical consumers of these technologies, and we want them to ethically produce them. I know that Mr. Hayes just talked about his social media app with Fanbase. We want a lot of kids that are leaving our K-12 schools to be able to do some of those same things. to create, but we also want them to be critical consumers of these technologies so that they are aware that meta technologies are doing stuff with their data. How can they protect their communities from surveillance? Those types of things. So when we're talking about computer science experiences, we also want kids to understand the societal and impacts of computing in those computer science classes. That's what we deem as something quality, not just teaching kids how to program or just teaching kids how to code.
Thank you so much for that information. I think that is humbling and it grounds us and really helps to paint a vivid picture of where we are currently. So, given this context and in the spirit of tonight's theme, Imagine This, and this question is for everyone. What is your ideal vision for the tech workforce development of our Black K-12 students in Metro Atlanta? And what would you say are 1 to 2 challenges in your work or that you just see in general that are significantly threatening this vision? So we'll go in the same order as before. We'll start with you, Anona.
Shana, thank you so much for grounding us in the data and really painting a picture of the situation where we find ourselves. So when I think about the vision for students in going into technical fields, I really think about the pathways that we want them to have access to so that they gain the knowledge and skills that they're going to need to thrive in our digital economy. And there are a couple of key components, and I think Shana has touched on several of these. I mean, for one, I want all Black students to have access to inclusive classrooms that celebrate the contributions of Black technologists and change makers. And unfortunately, to date, that is not the case. I envision a world where all students have access to really high quality instruction in all the fundamentals: literacy, numeracy, digital skills, how to navigate the internet, how to make ethical and responsible choices, as Shana talked a little bit about. But I also envision a world where Black students have access to role models who share their identities. So much of our challenge, I think, in this work is helping students to see themselves in technology and really demystify what tech is, who belongs there, and the kinds of problems that they'll get to solve if they decide to pursue the world. And then finally, I think we have such strong communities, but our communities aren't necessarily equipped always with the information needed to really coach students to pursue tech courses and tech pathways. For example, when students take advanced placement computer science, we see that they tend to major in computer science at the post-secondary level at much higher rates. And so we really need the communities to be equipped with the knowledge and the skills and the coaching talking points that they need to be able to encourage students to pursue that. So I think, as I've talked about some of the challenges, but I think making sure all students have access to high quality foundational skills is one of the greatest barriers, but then also helping to shape and helping students to identify that identity, the confidence, the sense of belonging in tech are really important.
So number one, plus one to what Anona and Shana have shared. And again, I also echo the thank you to Shana for centering us in the conversation. Two things. One, as it relates to access, particularly from an economic mobility standpoint, and two, as it relates to philanthropy. So relative to access, Shana provided some very critical data points, right? And then the reality is, particularly when we talk about when we make associations, right? So there's the numbers as they sit in terms of the representation of students just taking, CS courses and high quality CS courses. But then if you associate that with things like our scholarship, our state scholarship program, right? So the Hope and the Zell Miller, our Zell Miller in particular, in addition to the GPA, like students have to take 4 hours of rigorous courses to be eligible for their own state scholarship. And if we think through one of the points that Shana made, right, where those courses are not even made available to students, you are literally impacting their capacity to gain a scholarship to a 2-year program, to a 4-year program in their own state and as a part of their state institutions that they might be right down the street from, right? If you're talking the metro Atlanta school systems that she referenced, that's detrimental to the forward progress and the forward opportunity in building the generational wealth if students don't even have access to these things from a course perspective, and then it becomes residual in terms of the additional impact that it has. So increasing the accessibility, changing policy to ensure that these things can exist, particularly now that we're on the other side of Senate Bill 1080. These are the things we have to focus on. These are the things we have to champion. These are the things where we have to ensure that our voices don't go silent or quiet to ensure and enable this for the students. So I'll get off that soapbox and move to the second one in terms of a vision from a philanthropic perspective. So particularly given the landscape of where we sit currently, and I know Joey gave us the charge of being positive, but as we acknowledge the where we are, and the things that are being threatened, like the Department of Education, the things that have been stated and policies that are now being put in place in the last 24 to 48 hours, it is a call to private philanthropy to lean into this conversation, to become active participants in creating that access and creating those equitable opportunities. From the standpoint of we can no longer have a high dependency on what will be available federally, we need to have a greater dependency on what's going to be able and what's going to be available privately from a private philanthropy. So from a vision perspective, we need more of that and we need more participation in that space. Thank you.
Thank you all. So when I think about my ideal vision for the Black K-12 students, number one is definitely making sure that we provide equitable access to high quality computer science education. I think Shana mentioned that, as well as Anona, and not just high quality computer science education, but it needs to start from an early age. I think having more early exposure in our elementary schools, as well as making sure that students understand that there are clear pathways that can lead them from the classroom to the tech workspace. I also think that when we think about elementary school and computer science, we need to think more about computer science integration. And that kind of goes well beyond, when we're thinking about elementary, middle, and high school, understanding that when we're looking at some of these content or academic subject areas, such as math, science, social studies, ELA, think about the ways that we can integrate some of those computer science and make it an interdisciplinary subject. So that way, it can really resonate with students and their lived experiences. Also thinking about some robust partnerships with industry leaders. I think that will be helpful to help provide some hands-on experiences. I know Anona has mentioned the mentorships, as well as having some more career exposures. When I think about maybe some of the barriers, I think, and this has been mentioned previously, but just being able to have that teacher preparation and not only making sure that teachers are adequately trained, but seeing if they're going through some education programs, having computer science embedded in some of those pre-service teacher programs. For many of our schools, there are a lot of educators who are computer science teachers, but that was not maybe their choice. And so many of them lack some of that quality training that is needed. And so I think that sometimes can be a barrier. And then sometimes I think also the retention piece. We're starting to see, while we have increased the number of computer science teachers and certified computer science teachers in the state of Georgia, we do still have a hard time retaining those teachers. And I think, we have to make sure that we're building those teachers with confidence, making sure that they have access. I know we talk a lot about the access to the students, but we also need to think about the access to the professional development opportunities that are available for those teachers. And then being able to really reach out and make sure that we're figuring out a plan on keeping those teachers and retaining those teachers, so that way, they can be competitive and they can go back to their students and build some of those career opportunities that are available to them.
I figured since we were behind, I was going to just let you continue on because I started, and that way everybody else was able to answer the question. So my vision, of course, is to dismantle everything and start all over because our educational system is inequitable and will never be equitable in the state that it currently is in. So we can't expect Black students to have success in an institution that was created for literally and based on the premise of whiteness and white supremacy. So that's my vision, is to dismantle everything and start all over. But I know that it's not feasible. All the things that everybody's talked about before, I 100% agree with. And I think the big piece is listening to teachers. I think that's something that has not happened very, very well, especially since the beginning of the pandemic. We've just continued to inundate teachers with stuff. As a former teacher, I taught in Gwinnett County, taught for 16 years. And there were so many times that I was not listened to, and I'm the person actually working with students. So I can tell you what does and does not work. A lot of people that don't work in schools have lots of ideas for people in schools, but they don't have the practicality to actually implement them. So I think listening to teachers, passing the mic and elevating their voices is also another thing. And I think the other big thing, I think Lavita and Anona have also mentioned, is most teachers need two things. They need time and money. If what you're doing for teachers does not give them time or money, then it is wasting everybody's time, not only students, but those teachers and those schools. So pay the teachers for attending these trainings, encouraging them with stipends, those types of things. And then also find ways to alleviate their schedule so they're not teaching or have literally 6 preps to prep for that are all different things and that kind of stuff. So I think that onus is on school buildings and school leaders to do a better job of making sure that all teachers are better equipped. But ultimately, our schools are inequitable. So until we kind of tackle those issues, CS is going to remain inequitable as well.
Woo, that was some information right there. Thank you all so much for that. And so in the interest of time, what I want to do is, and I think some of you all have started to touch on this, because Lavita, you talked about teacher prep. Shana, you went into what teachers need. Erica, you talked about private philanthropy. And I think everyone, here tonight wants to know, what can we do? But some people may not have the access into school leaders and teachers. If there is anything that is like specific, immediately actionable that people in this audience can do, that they can lean into, that'll directly impact local efforts to improve the readiness, what would you suggest that you haven't suggested already, or you want to just re-emphasize?
I mean, I would emphasize just the CS for Atlanta movement. Feel free to get in touch with me. As I said, the partnership has started with those 8 districts. We do have the hopes to expand once we see some good outcomes, but we just started the initiative last May. So we're not even a full year in yet, but we have seen some progress. So I would say connect with me. I think somebody mentioned in the chat, which is something I actually did. I actually ran for school board. So if you are in a position where you're not tied to a K-12 school, you can run for your local school board. We need more informed people, and we need more Black people on school boards, because most of the school populations in Metro Atlanta are predominantly Black. And so run for local school board. That is where you can, in effect, as Eric mentioned, policy, because that's where all the policies that come down happen. I think the other big thing is just making sure that you're not, I don't want to say overstepping bounds, but reach out to people that have been doing the work. So you're not going to just reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of people in Atlanta that have been working in the K-12 space, the ones on this call, and a lot of others that I would be more than happy to connect you with. Please reach out and just offer your services, even if it is just, I'm going to come and do some guest speaking, or I'm going to come and do a hackathon at the school, whatever the case may be, just to get involved. Because not only, as Anona mentioned, do the kids need to see people that look like them in computer science, but they need to see that it's something that is a viable career. And the thing that I always announced upon to my students is it's a career that makes you money. And so financial stability is a big thing that Black communities are all seeking. And so this is a great way to live that financial security by getting engaged in the tech workforce. So I think the big thing is just to get involved, plug in somewhere, small, large, medium, it does not matter, but plug in, because the kids need you, teachers need you in these schools. And basically that is how we're going to move this train along. It's of course going to be a little bit slower now with our new incoming president, but ultimately it's still going to move, and it requires all of us to collectively decide, how am I going to get my hands in this pot and help things move along to make things better for Black kids in Metro Atlanta.
Thank you so much for that. Are there any other comments from the other ladies?
I'll just add, that was a beautiful response, Shana. I feel like you captured it really well. The one thing I'll say very specifically, getting back to this idea of building interest and identity with tech, if you are an individual, it is really easy to go, as Shana said, visit a school and do a talk on what you do, to sign up to be a mentor. And these things actually really make a big difference for students. But if you are an organization or a business owner, I encourage you to consider hosting high school interns, high school apprentices, and bringing them into your space. Now, this may require policy change and additional resources, but it's worth it to really demystify, again, what it means to go into tech and really boost the interest, because in Metro Atlanta, there's a really big gap between students' interest in tech and their aptitude, their ability to succeed. And we need to begin to close that by doing some of these individual things, but also these systemic things to really create greater alignment between what's happening in schools and what's happening out in the real world.
Thank you so much for that, Anona. Erica?
Yeah, I just want to double down on the policy aspect. I know it didn't really resonate when I mentioned it before, but Shana, I appreciate you for calling it out in your comments. Because a lot of times when people hear policy, right, they make an assumption that it's in reference to something big, or they think about it from a federal perspective and don't really concentrate on the policy that happens in their backyard, right? So everything that was discussed, professional development, funding for greater access to courses, making sure, that there's certification, greater certification available for teachers, ensuring that more schools, particularly in under-resourced communities, have not just the teachers, but also the computers to be in those schools, or the one-to-one technology. Those are things that can be impacted by policy changes. So going to your school board meetings, showing up for committee meetings under the Gold Dome downtown, identifying, just keeping up. There are apps that allow you to keep up with policy changes, policies that are on the table when those committee meetings are happening. And there is now officially a technology committee that exists right within our state legislation. Those are the ways that you can make a difference. And oh, by the way, if they dismantle the U.S. Department of Education as they're planning to do, that's going to put even more autonomy in the hands of states. States actually already have a lot of autonomy. It's just how they use it, and they use it disparately, unfortunately. But they will have even more. That's the whole quote unquote intent, if the U.S. Department of Education gets dismantled. So that puts it back in our hands. So I just want to reemphasize that word, because policy shows up in multiple ways, and we have to be okay with showing up for it. I think this past election reflects the need for showing up. And if we don't want things to always continue down in a trickle down and in a residual and in a domino effect, we have to decide we're going to show up, even if it's not pretty, even if it's not easy, even if we're standing there alone. But we have to bring our voice, we have to bring our circle of influence to the conversation and to making the impact, all the amazing impactful changes that you've heard all three of these women talk about tonight.
Thank you. Thank you so much, ladies, for such an informative and a thoughtful, candid conversation. I'm more than confident that this audience will be walking away with a much better understanding about where we are and how we need to mobilize together in this ecosystem. So thank you